welcome back to another episode of Inside Outlook. Today, I want to tell you about the best books I've read this year. Okay, it's time for my annual book brag. As I'm filming this episode, so far I've read 161 books this year. Of course, it's not the quantity of books you read, but the quality. I have a A+ to F rating scale for books, and anything that's an A- or above is a great book in my opinion. So today I'm going to discuss all the great books I've read this year, except I'm saving my very favorite book for next week's video because I want to do a full review. So of the 161 books, I gave an A- rating to 13 books and an A rating to 6 books. And the only A+ I gave was to my favorite book of the year. These books are of multiple genres, including nonfiction. So let's start with my 13 A- rating books. I read Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, the famous children's book. I don't usually read children's books, but I've never read this one, and one of my favorite authors, China Miéville, mentioned that he was inspired by the sequel called Through the Looking Glass, so I ended up reading both books. I actually feel like these books work better when combined, and this is what they did for the famous animated Disney film. I read The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, which is a nonfiction psychology book. You ask most people about death, they'll tell you that they're fine with dying. They say stuff like, well, I was fine with not existing before I was born, so I'll be fine with not existing after I die. This book reminds us that we have this ethereal voice saying, you are going to die, you are going to die, that is always talking. And a lot of the way we live our lives is to get this voice to shut up or be drowned out. Whatever we can do to not be reminded of our imminent death. It's a fascinating book. So then you might ask, well then why only an A- rating? Some of the chapters are Freudian nonsense about oral and anal stages and all kinds of childhood psychology psychobabble. That doesn't take away from the insight of the better chapters. I would like to do a whole episode about this book in the future. Both Child of God and Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy were great little sinister novels. I have read almost all of McCarthy's books, and I'd like to do an episode about his oeuvre after I finish them all. I reread On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which I originally read 23 years ago. I used to be an antisocial loner, and this book helped me come out of my shell a little bit. I have a lot to say about Kerouac, and I want to do a future episode about him. I also reread Dharma Bums by him this year, which I rated a B+. I'm definitely a Kerouac fan. I love reading biographies, and I recently read a great one about the famous logician Kurt Gödel called Journey to the Edge of Reason that was recently published in 2021. I have this collection of history books by Will and Ariel Durant called The Story of Civilization, 11 giant tomes. This year I read one of them called The Age of Louis XIV. I enjoy these books, but I'm not sure I would recommend them because they're older history books and it's a huge undertaking. I managed to finish The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. It's a big 650-page book all about advances in technology that Kurzweil thinks will lead to the singularity. The singularity is when artificial intelligence rapidly improves itself to a point far beyond human intelligence. Artificial intelligence is fascinating to me, and I'll be talking about it much more in the future. Vladimir Nabokov, the famous author, wrote a great autobiography called Speak Memory. Brilliant prose. Nabokov displays his literary genius and high general intelligence. Impressive, inspiring, I generally love his writing. I read and enjoyed The Path to Power, the first volume of Robert Caro's 5-volume biography of President Johnson. LBJ comes off as single-mindedly pursuing political power at all costs, no matter how underhanded. Caro has been writing this biography of LBJ for over 40 years. He still has not published the last volume. He's 88 years old. I read The Metamorphoses by Franz Kafka, a short classic novella starting with the famous line, "One morning, as Gregor Samsa was waking from anxious dreams, he discovered in bed that he had been changed into a monstrous verminous bug." I'm not a big Kafka fan generally, but this one is a must-read. A great science fiction book I read this year is Diaspora by Greg Egan. The novel is full of fun futurism that is the stuff a sci-fi fan wants to read about. You are made to think what it would be like to be an immortal digital consciousness, which leads to thinking about things on a universal time scale, higher dimensions. This book is nerd heaven. Another great science fiction book I read this year is Revelation Space by Alastair Reynolds. Revelation Space rocks. Good characters, fascinatingly complex world building in the 26th century, dark sci-fi setting taking place in star systems 10 to 20 light years from Earth. Gripping plot full of mystery and devoid of dullness. The ending wasn't completely satisfactory because some of it didn't make sense, but it was still a great novel. On to the A ratings. Okay, I'm a little embarrassed about my love for this next book, the novelization of the movie Alien. First of all, the film is excellent, so why even bother with the novel? Well, you get to know what's going on in the characters' heads, and there is some extra detail. I read a lot of sci-fi books, and usually sci-fi book stories are better than the stories in sci-fi films and TV shows. But the Alien film has a great story, an iconic protagonist, and good characters all around. You even have Jones the cat for some lightheartedness amidst the dark chaos. Everything about the alien antagonist was cool to me. I couldn't really find any faults with the film. It's pretty perfect, and the novel is the same way. I know a lot of hardcore science fiction book fans are scoffing at me for rating a movie novelization so high, but it's a way of comparing a great film to great books. Battle Cry of Freedom by James McPherson is the best one-volume history of the Civil War. I'm a history buff, but the Civil War is not one of my pet interests, so this one-volume work was perfect for me. Alien Oceans by astrobiologist Kevin Hand, published in 2020, is all about the oceans of Ganymede, Enceladus, Titan, Triton, Callisto, even Pluto, but most of all, Europa. I'm a space nerd and I love space exploration. This is an up-to-date book with a lot of great information. I read a great book about superconductors and the competition between China and America called Chip War by Chris Miller, published in 2022. A must-read for anyone interested in geopolitics and technology. Sometimes you just want some comfort reading. I reread Game of Thrones this year and 2 of the sequels, but after the 3rd book I lost interest. I originally read the series back in 2013. Since the author will never finish the series, and the sequels being weaker than the first book, and the TV show ending so horribly, I'm not sure I could recommend the series. But the first book is one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. Another great fantasy novel is The Lions of Al-Rassan by Guy Gabriel Key. I had never read this author before and I was highly impressed. It's basically a historical fiction novel about medieval Spain, but it's set in a fantasy world. There's no magic. I think this is a good idea for writing historical fiction without worrying about getting every detail right. Okay, wow, this was a lot of great books. Stay tuned next week for my review of my favorite book of the year. That's all for today's show. If you have any thoughts, disagreements, whatever, let me know in the comments section. And also, let me know what are some of the best books you read this year. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell to get updated about the next episode. Thank you.